Yes, I'm Kristen, and I apologize. I'm coming off being a little sick, so I'm just gonna sound kind of terrible for this whole talk. I am currently now a fourth-year PhD candidate at the university, and my advisors are Nathan Suderman and Matthew Guzda. So I want to.
You want to hide the. Yeah, go to more. And then say hide control.
I want to first just start with a quick outline for this talk. First, I want to talk about opportunities for AI in video games. Like, I realize that I'm working in a space that not very many other people at this university necessarily spend a lot of time working in. So I want to just talk generally about like what is kind of going on in this field. Then I'm going to talk about AI directors, as you know from the title. This talk is going to be focused about AI directors, so I want to just introduce those to everyone. Then we're going to take a quick detour to talk about quests. I actually have several papers published about quests, so it's important to understand the context of my research. So we're going to talk about that for a little bit. Then go into actually working on this AI director for Nightingale, and then talking about some takeaways for this industry academic collaboration that I was a part of. So the first kind of question is like, where can AI be used in games? And this seems like it's an obvious, like easy question to ask, but like these kinds of answers are not necessarily like straightforward to people who have never actually like worked in production, like worked in video games, something like that. So a big one is the game development process. So like making a game is really long and complicated, costs millions of dollars, like all these things. And so there's a lot of places that AI could be used to help speed up or reduce some of the more tedious burdens that exist when you're making a game. There's also just putting it in the video game itself. Like, I think when people think AI in games, they think like, fancy like AI that can do all these things. Like the one in Alien Isolation supposedly had a learning algorithm that would learn like how you were walking around the ship, and it would like come and find you better. So like, these are the kinds of things that people will think about, but there's like two different main areas that I can use in games. So first I want to talk about using them as part of the development process. So like video games are really, really hard to make, which is the reason why not very many of them come out a year. And then like a lot of them have even really long development cycles. You need art to make a game, you need writing, you need sound, you need programming, you need design. This is like very high level. There are other things you need. They're even not these things, but like at its kind of like core, we can think of like, these are the minimum things that you need to make a video game. And so AI could be used to help any of these particular areas if someone was interested in working on like one of those problems. I'm going to actually just talk about art because it has kind of the most like straightforward or easiest way to understand how AI could be applied to these areas, but keep in mind it could be used for any of these. So there's this program called SpeedTree. It uses wave function collapse, and it's actually a really, really widely used like industry standard tool, and it makes a tree very, very fast. SpeedTree. And this kind of thing is really important because it's not taking away jobs from environmental artists. Like environmental artists are still really, really important because the placement, number of trees, type of trees, all these things still need to be decided by environmental artists. But it means you don't need to have somebody sit there and make like 10,000 leaves. And that's really, really important because making 10,000 leaves is tedious and awful. And with graphics being even more high fidelity and more realistic than they used to be, something like this that can speed up the process, that can make a tree that looks like pretty good. Like, you can tell that this is rendered, but it looks like a pretty good tree. It's a lot better than it used to be. So these kinds of tools are really important because they find an area of like game development where it's really tedious to have to pay a real human to have to do all these things. Human doesn't want to do the work. But if you have an AI do it, it can speed up the work and it doesn't take away their job. The big, like, famous example right now going on is Midjourney, right? I'm sure everyone here has heard of Midjourney. These are just some images I grabbed from it, but like, there's debate on where something like Midjourney could be used in video games because there's not like this really clear, like, hey, Midjourney does this one specific thing that slots really specifically into the pipeline that works with these specific artists or like disciplines. Midjourney just said, hey, maybe you could do this. And there wasn't like a lot of feedback from industry or kind of talk about what that might look like ahead of time. So I just bring up Midjourney here, where like I understand this is a very impressive tool. It's very cool. It's not necessarily immediately clear how you could be using these AI. And it's important if you want to make AI for video games to really understand like what your goal for if you want it to be used in industry, like who's it for and is it helpful? Like, do the people even want it? Midjourney just kind of came out and existed, and Midjourney can be used in cases that aren't video games. But when they position themselves like as a company that they want to help video game development, you need to really understand like where they will fit into this development process. So now I'm going to talk about actually using them in video games. This is where my research comes in. So I'm not actually using AI for the development process, but I'm using them in an actual game. So there's a couple of things that you would think of as AI in games. The most common one is AI like NPC behaviors. Elizabeth was another like famous one when she came out, where people really liked the NPC behavior on Elizabeth. This is, there's nothing really fancy or complicated about it, but the people who created Bioshock Infinite really, really cared about making her AI feel good to play with. And so there's a lot of like time invested into making something like that good. For my work, I do AI directors, as you have probably guessed. And so this is a part of AI in games that not necessarily everybody knows about. Payday 2 has an AI director in it, but it's one of those things that's not necessarily like big advertised. People that worked on Payday 2 were not trying to sell this as like a marketing tool of like, hey, we want everyone to know that Payday 2 has an AI director. They actually tend to kind of keep these things secret for a couple of different reasons. But having these AI directors in games are really, really important and really powerful. They're just not as easy to find, and it's not what we think of when we think of AI in games. So the big canonical example of an AI director is in the game Left 4 Dead. So the term AI director comes from a talk from somebody who worked on Left 4 Dead, and he talked about this AI that he was making for this game. So Left 4 Dead is an old game at this point. It came out in 2008, and it's a zombie shooter. So the point of it is, you're trapped and you have to get out, but then there's like hordes of zombies between you and the door, so you have to kill all of them. It's also notably multiplayer, so you can play with like some of your friends to try to like basically get out of this experience. So if we look a little bit closer at the Left 4 Dead AI director, the design goals of this AI director was to maintain a stressed player experience. This is a zombie shooter. This is not a chill game. This is not Animal Crossing. This is not like all these other kinds of things. They have a really specific goal in mind, and they want you to be like kind of stressed. It's supposed to be kind of scary. And how they do that is it dynamically modifies parts of the game to maintain that experience. So it will change the amount of ammo you receive based on how well you're doing the game. So if you're doing really, really well and killing all the zombies, suddenly it's going to stop giving you as much ammo. It will stop giving you as much health packs, and it will spawn more difficult enemies. So you're basically not going to just be able to like walk through and be like, oh yeah, I got an easy run. The AI director says, hey, we notice you're doing really well. What if we made it harder for you? And this is the very idea of an AI director. It's taking feedback from the player like in real time, and it's changing some parts of the game to try to create a specific intended experience. So this brings us to 3 relevant questions for AI directors that everybody who works in AI director should be able to answer. The first one is, when does the adaptation occur? The second one is, what's the design goal for adapting the game? And the third one is, what part of the game is being adapted? So like, if you don't know these 3 things about the AI director, it's kind of like a problem. You should probably sort that out. So I want to talk about some common design goals for AI directors, just as like a high level as a field, because there has been academic work in this area. You can change the narrative. They're usually called drama managers, not AI directors in academic research, but it's just the idea that you might want to change what part of the story the player receives next based on how they've interacted with the story or other parts of the game previously. There's also a dynamic difficulty adjustment, or DDA. Max Payne's another game that has DDA. Payday 2 has DDA. It's basically just the idea that if you're doing really well in a game, it will make the game a little bit harder, but if you're doing kind of badly, like the game doesn't want to make you like grind it out. It says, hey, we'll reduce the health on these creatures here for you so that you can get past this level. And DDA is the most common application of AI directors, both in industry and in academic research. There's a lot of literature looking at how to do DDA in different like types of games, different areas, because it's a more like it's just a more commonly explored problem. So I, of course, am not doing either of those. I'm doing an AI director for gameplay preference. So the idea is here we have really, really big games nowadays. Like Tears of the Kingdom is easily a 120-hour game minimum. People are going to be spending, 200, 300, 1,000 hours in this game. To fill a game with that much content, you need to have a lot of variety of things to do. And in order to actually have all of that, you're going to have different players like running through your game. It's completely possible, reasonable, expected that every single player goes through your game. Some parts of the game they are not going to like, and some of the parts they're really going to like, right? Your game is huge. You can't please everyone with everything. Now, the idea is each of these like players are going to have some sort of preference. And what if we could target that particular preference and give them the content of the game that they like doing? So this is where my AI director comes in and the work on Nightingale comes in. So the design goal for this AI director is to provide players with gameplay that they want to engage with. And how do you do that is through quests. Quests are really important. There's a lot of things that you could think about, like when I say the word quest, a lot of things that are associated with it. But the important part for my AI director is that quest can be thought of as like a package of gameplay, right? So if you can say, hey, I know this player likes this type of gameplay. I have a quest that has this type of gameplay. We can match it that way. And so this is where we go into the detour about quests. Because my AI director is focused on changing quests, I want to go into some background information about quests and some of my previous work to help you understand better what's going on. So I have a generalized quest definition here. You don't need to necessarily like read all the math. You can just think of a quest as a set of tasks with some of the reward associated with it. The reward is going to be a variety of different things. It could be an in-game item, a narrative element, or a progression element. So these are just some of the things that you can consider to be a reward. More formally, I want to define what a task is. And this is something that is unique to my quest definition. Most of the time, quest definitions stop at that previous level and they just say, yeah, it's a task and there's no further information about what that could possibly be. So for me, a task is going to be this like 5 tuple. So P is going to be set of players that can complete the task. C is the condition that must be made true in order to complete the task. And then M is the system that's going to check the part of the game that is like checking to see if C is going to be true or not. And this is really important because you can model the games in lots of different ways. So this is not saying like, oh, you have to model this like as a graph and like the only way you can solve it is like looking at it in this way. It's like, no, there's just the idea of whatever given model you have, there's got to be some way to check to make sure that the players don't survive. I is going to be the presentation of the task. This is something that is also unique to my own personal research. And it's just the things that you show to the player in order to help them actually complete the quest, right? Like you have to give them something. You can't just let them like wander around. You never tell them what they're supposed to do, they will never do it. So that could be straightforward things like just writing down in simple text, like, hey, you should do this thing. It could be like markers on a map that help show the player where to go. There's also more diegetic kinds of things, like in this last example, where it's like more physically in the map rather than having to like toggle between different screens. There's also going to be a set of rewards that's going to give to the player at the task level. And this is just allows us to more formalize, like saying, hey, these are when these rewards happen along the course of like actually completing these tasks. And having that ability to say that gives you a more clear picture of what a quest is actually making. So now I want to talk about this other thing that I worked on, the definition of public purpose paradigm. This came out of talking to a lot of industry professionals about how they think about quests and how they practically use them. So definition is going to be the state space of all possible quests in games. The context is the set of creative or production constraints that developers have to have in the game, right? Like As we've talked about already, like games are huge and they cost a lot of money. You don't have infinite money, you don't have infinite time. So there's going to be just practical like life limitations to these things. Like you can't have everything. And so that's where the context comes in. Like, sometimes you can't have a 5-minute cutscene for every quest, and that's okay. Like, so just noting that down is kind of how you want to do that context. Also purpose, which is the reason or reasons that the quest is in the game. So this is just the backend information about quests to help you like better understand this AI director that I'm going to be talking about for Nightingale. So as you remember, it's my AI director. We're going to give them gameplay that the players want to engage with, and we're doing it by giving them quests that we think has the gameplay that's associated with it they want to do. So this kind of like brings in the question of like, okay, I have this like concept, like where does this fit into like an actual video game? And the most obvious spot for something like this is a daily quest system. There's other kinds of quest systems that exist, but we can just think about daily quest systems for a second. So daily quest systems, and kind of in their name, are just one kind of design pattern for how quests are delivered to players. The daily comes from the fact that most of the time they'll refresh on a daily basis, so they'll be new every day. This is Animal Crossing. It kind of breaks some of those like conventional rules. It is not like on a strict timer. But in Animal Crossing, you're given 5 of these quests. These are all different quests, and you can complete these quests, right? And when you complete with these quests, a new one will actually like come in afterwards. There's always going to be 5 for you. But other kinds of daily quest systems will do things like, okay, you only have 3, and you have to complete it within this 24-hour time span. If you don't, sucks. So the other kind of feature that I want to talk about with daily quest systems is they're usually associated with some sort of premium currency. So premium currency is just a term that usually means that it's associated with like real world money, right? So Animal Crossing has a premium currency that you can't buy with real money, but a lot of games, their premium currency is the one you can buy. And that's important because it's talking about the rewards and why there could be some pain points of the daily quest system. So the design goals roughly of these things is just you want to have the player actually come back and play your game, right? If you give them something new to do every day, they would be incentivized to be like, hey, like I know there's a new quest for me to do. I want to go do it. So it's kind of generally used as like a retention system. So they'll return to the game. It also has this premium currency like aspect of it because premium currencies have been shown as a way to provide funding for games, to make them profitable. Having something like this is an incentive for a development studio to put it in their game. So this is what the studio would want out of the system, not necessarily what players. So this is where I kind of talk about some of like my problems with daily quest systems. You can have your own problems, you can disagree, but these are some things that I think are not great about that. So sometimes they ask you to do things that you already did, and I'm not enjoying that. They'll ask you to do something you don't want to do. Like they just give you things. Then if you hate doing that part of the game, because again, these games are massive nowadays, the game just says, suck it. Do you want your premium currency or not? Basically. So people want the premium currency, so they just do it and they're mad about it. They also just want to support their personal goals. Because these games are so large, a lot of times to maintain this dedicated player base, people decide that they want to do specific things in the game that the game is not telling them to do. The new Breath of the Wild game is a really good example of that, where people are building all these like crazy contraptions to do all these like crazy things. Like, they're building Gundams in the game. The game never said build a Gundam, like it just does not. But people really want to do that. And if you have something like, hey, I need to do this tangent detour to do this part of the game that they don't really like to do, and it doesn't really support the thing that I want to be doing, it's just like, why are we even doing it then? Like, this is clearly not good. So the question just becomes like, are these daily quest systems like really working? Like, does it really do the thing that it should be doing? And is it actually encouraging people to come back to the game? And you can kind of argue that if you meet these frustrations, it's like, hey, if I know this daily quest system is just going to ask me to do things that I don't want to do in your game, maybe I don't come back. Like maybe I don't want to do that quest, and maybe it's not accomplishing the kind of main reason that studios put these in the game in the first place. So these kind of player problems are kind of directly informing like whether or not this system is going to be effective or not. So this is just what I put as a solution. This is not like someone formally like writing down on paper or anything like that. But commonly this argument, like from like, the internet people, whatever, is you should just make a better quest. Like this idea of just like these daily quest systems are bad because the quests in them are bad. It's kind of like weird because like you have real life time constraints. Like every single quest that you make costs time and money. And I promise you the quests that those developers put in the game are the best quests that that team could put in the game. Like they're not sitting around and being like, oh yeah, let me make the absolute worst thing for people to play my game. Like developers want you to like what they're doing. So this kind of idea that you can just say, well, a daily quest system would be less frustrating if the quest was better, like doesn't really make any sense. So I'm going to go through the definition, context, purpose, paradigm again with like these Animal Crossing to kind of talk about why this doesn't make any sense. So we have just my definition here. And for this system, the context of it is it has these like bubble appearances game, they all have one task, and it should take like a short time to complete. Like they're not trying to drag you into being like, hey, this is a 3-hour adventure. It's like, no, you should spend 5, 15, maybe 20 minutes to try to like do things. And then the purpose is to provide the kind of easy challenges to complete and then reward the players with small amounts of this in-game currency. And given this setup, like given this context and these purposes, like the quests that they put in the game perfectly match what they're trying to do. So again, this idea of like, oh, well, if you just put a better quest doesn't really hold up. So I'm proposing that instead it's about how we choose the content and not about the content itself. All of these daily quest systems use a random algorithm. Like it's just randomly picking things. And it's easy to see why. It's cheap. You can do it in less than half an hour. Like it will just work. But what if we use an AI directory instead to more intelligently say, hey, I know all my quests are good, but I know just because of like how people are, you might not like some of them. And what if we just don't give those to you? Like, what if we just give you the ones that you want? So this is where this quest-based AI directory design comes in. So I worked with developers, like, quite a lot of experience to actually like design and like identify these design goals to create this AI directory with. So we want to identify the preferred gameplay and then provide them with more quests of that type. And then we want to support players who create their own goals in this game. We have to make some assumptions to do this though. So the assumption is that all quests are going to have the same quality. And then this AI directory is intended to deploy in the final version of this game. So this is the part where I get to talk. Oh, right. Well, I guess my YouTube link is broken. This is supposed to be the trailer for Nightingale. I'll be honest with you, though, the trailer for Nightingale does not really tell you very well, like what I need to talk about here. So Nightingale is currently being developed by Inflection Games here in Edmonton. And the reason why this trailer is not so useful is it's going to publish as a survival crafting game. When I was working at Inflection, we were working on an MMO. Those are very different things. So all of this research is done in the context of an MMORPG, which is just different than a survival crafting game. So the marketing material that's like available to you right now is just not the same game that this AI directory is intended to. So I'm going to talk about the main game loop. So you have Nightingale City. And from there, you can travel to a canonical realm. And then from a canonical realm, you can travel to a temporal realm. And you can go back to Nightingale City. So these are like the 3 different like areas that you can be in Nightingale. And this is important because this is where you can actually do like all your activities and tasks, right? So in the canonical realm and in the temporal realm, you can pick up, like you can do all these like gameplay and you can pick up quests, and the quests give you XP. There's the quest board. And then what you can do is you can go back to Nightingale City and you can spend it XP, so you can get that, right? Carry heavier things, walk faster, like whatever, you have whatever you want. So it's got this like loop of like you need to go in between Nightingale City and these other areas to like really close with it, because otherwise you are not getting better, right? You can't spend your XP with that. So this is what the quest board looks at Nightingale. So this is what we ran into some studies, what players actually saw. So you can see at the top here, this is where the players would select which quest they wanted to do. The quests in Nightingale are a little bit unique as far as video games go. This isn't like the first time people do this, not very common, but any quest on this quest board, you're actually allowed to decide when you want to do it. Most of the time in daily quest systems or just quest systems in general, they're just like, hey, you can do this. And I mean, there's a world where you say, I don't do this, and you just draw your name. Like that's true, but like this is the game itself asking you, like, hey, do you actually want to do this thing? In the same board, you can also turn in a contract for the SP. So now I'm going to talk through how these quests in Nightingale work. And these quests were actually truly designed using like this research. So like when I was applying it to the Animal Crossing game, I am using my best guess as like a game developer like on Nightingale for 3 years and like understanding how games work. This is like actual truth because I was there and this is how we designed the quests. We were using like this quest definition that like I worked on to design these quests. And what that kind of means is we were using the context and the purpose as well, really very specifically. So when I say everything like the quests are designed in this way, it's because like we actually designed the quest that way. This here is just a little figure that I showed you guys, or I wrote you guys. So when you would arrive in a Kinecrom or temporal realm, the first thing you see is this quest board. So like you pop into the portal and the quest will be to your left, you can see it. So it's very common, like so it's very unlikely. It's not unlikely for people to miss it, right? So it's not one of those things where people just like don't know that it exists. Like people know it's there. Yeah, so I think I just had my slides slightly out of order there. But the context that we had for the quest in Nightingale is each of these quests need to have exactly one task. So we're not asking these players to do multiple things, and this is because we're trying to learn the preferred gameplay. So if you have a quest where it has more than one task, but those tasks have different gameplay, it's really difficult to be like, okay, you know, like what gameplay is this? So to simplify that problem out, we just said, no, there's only gonna be one type of gameplay for each of the quests. You know, they can choose to accept a board, and the kind of interesting thing about Nightingale is every time you interact with the board board will re-roll which quest you want. So it's not like on a 24-hour timer, it's like anytime you say like, hey, let me look at this, it will actually be like giving you new quests based on what I think. And then we very strictly said like, these are the gameplay types that we're going to design for. For the purpose, we wanted to provide players with challenges to simulate a daily quest board. So this isn't like the traditional daily quest board on purpose. This is like the new version of the daily quest board. This is like the innovation. And you know, stuff like this happens in games all the time where like one studio will take a really common design pattern, innovate it just a little bit, and suddenly lock the new design pattern. So the idea here is not to completely like do away with this idea of daily quest boards like being bad. And I talk about like all these player problems. The idea here is that we're just going to be like, but can we get slightly better? And then you need to reward the player with XP so that they can actually like level up and play the game. So we have a couple different kinds of quests here. So we have crafting quests, and we have 22 of those. We have building quests, we have 33 of those. We have harvest quests, we have 19, and kill quests, which are 27. And so these represent the 4 gameplay like pillars that we had in the game at the time. And I say at the time because this is like prototype in development, right? Like this game is still not released to this day. So like this was a development version of like Nightingale, and so this is what existed. It was also like we tried to balance it so that there's roughly the same amount of quests of each gameplay type. These are directly affected by the fact that the game is not done. So there's just certain things you could do for structures. For the harvest one, we had acquire 10 common iron ore, and then for the kill, which is not here, it's like kill 5. So these are, again, I'm not trying to say that these kinds of quests are like, you know, great story narrative like things. Like these are just things that like players might want to be doing. So remember, this is my AI director. So these are the quests that we're going to modify. And we're going to choose which ones we're going to show to the player, given like some understanding of how players work. And so how we try to determine whether players actually like it is using combinatorial multi-armed bandits CNAP here. So this is a reinforcement learning algorithm. And so what's unique about my research is I'm basically saying that whatever the player is doing in the game, I don't care about. The thing we care about is whether or not they're accepting this quest or not. And this is a different kind of feedback loop than other kinds of like systems. So DDA AI directors, they'll look and see like, how is the player actually doing like in the game? And like, what are they doing? And I'm just using this one kind of feedback instead. So given a particular quest, we're going to define a quest proposal as these are the 3 quests we're going to show the player at a particular point in time. Then what we can do is we can apply an abstraction over the quest types, and we can do this one-to-one because like we designed this way. And so this is then going to be the arm for the bandit. So we're not conditioning arms on single quests in this, it's the entire proposal. So given an abstracted quest proposal, then what we can do is we can create superarms. So a superarm is just going to be a grouping of these kind of quests that are associated with each other. And we chose to do this superarm approach rather than these like standard arms, as you can imagine, like there's a lot of different kinds of like abstracted quest proposal, and this is going in a live game. You can't run 1,000 like rolls of it to wait for the reinforcement learning algorithm to figure the player out. If you do this 1,000 times, the player will get bored or not understand what's going on. We needed to learn a little bit faster. And so superarm is how we accomplish that. So how we design these superarms is really important. So let's say we have an abstracted quest proposal, there's a build class and 2 other kinds of quests. I don't really care. So now what we do is we build a superarm of every single type of abstracted quest proposal that has at least one build class in it. And this is important because then we can say like, these are how we're saying these are similar to each other. So now we can talk about how we actually want to reward these arms. So given a quest proposal, we can say a 0 or 1 outcome for whether or not the player actually accepted any of these particular quests. And we also know the abstracted quest proposal. So from here, we can basically get the number of accepted quests and like what type we have. So if we have the outcome and we have the abstracted quest proposal, we can build this like set of accepted quest types. So these are the things that we know that at time t, the player said, I like these things. And so if we have accepted quest types, for example, build and craft, what we do is we then break it down into the power set. So we can say we have crafting, we have building, and you're crafting and building. And we then reward the superarm of these particular types. So for the crafting one, we want to reward the superarm that has all the proposals that have at least 1 crafting quest. So the same thing with building, and then the superarm with a building and a crafting quest together. And so once we know which superarm we need to reward, we then just give a reward, which is the number of like quests basically that we accepted, right? So for craft, it's going to be reward of 1. For build, it's going to be reward of 1. But for the building and crafting combined, it's 2. So we're more highly weighting the proposals that are most similar to what the player said that they already liked. So now we can actually choose a quest to give to the player because we've been doing all this computation in this abstracted area. They're not quests that the player can actually interact with. So now we have our set of all superarms. And we're going to use UCB to select the next superarm. Then we're going to use user from random to select an arm out of that superarm, right? So now we have an abstracted quest proposal. Given this abstracted quest proposal, then we use uniform random to select quests of those particular types. So we are abstracted really far up because we can do learning faster by just ignoring the details. And this is kind of just saying, like, okay, a kill 5 wolves quest practically is different than a kill 5 bears quest, but my algorithm doesn't care. Those are the same. So now I'm going to talk about actually a human subject study that we ran with this.
So if I understand right, the algorithm learns like type, which types are preferred by which players. Is that what it does?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, the first question is, if you're using UCP, I assume that you're not using contextual bandit algorithm.
No, this is not
regular. So is there an assumption about stationarity here? Like if I think about the player, like a human player, I imagine that first they want to do something, and then they will put that arm a lot of times, but eventually they will not anymore, because like their mental state is in a different place than their state. But if you're not doing a contextual bandit algorithm, I guess there is no way of you doing this. So like, I'm thinking about how much of this is a long-term problem. Like, I want to keep this player interested over the long time. We're just like, can't just do the immediate thing, but maybe they don't know what's best for them because they're just going to shut down.
No, that's fair. And so, this is like purely theoretical because we weren't able to deploy this system for any like meaningfully long period of time. But this system can like continually learn. So if you keep asking for quests and you keep saying no, these are all garbage, it should eventually force the rewards down low enough that it will show you something else. And the practicalities of like, you know, how effective and like when that might happen, like I don't know, that would require like another experiment. But the hope is that given the fact that this is continuous learning, those kinds of problems wouldn't be too much friction for the player, right? So like we can think about it in terms of like, oh, well, you know, it might take this many steps to like converge to some sort of like, this is the distribution, but like the number of steps doesn't really matter if the player doesn't feel a difference. Like if the player doesn't feel a difference between 7 and 8, like maybe it's fine, something like that. Does that make sense?
If I understand correctly, sometime at the beginning you said one of the objectives is that you want to like show a mission to a player that they haven't done that right before, so it's somewhat novel.
So that is something that I'm proposing is a problem with current daily quest systems.
Yes.
This algorithm cannot solve for that specifically. I'm just saying that that's a thing that, you know, maybe someone else could have done.
Why not your model always choose the largest possible superarm? Because the reward is maximized and it's high probable that a user finds his or her interest between those number of quests.
So technically the way that like superarms are like practically managed, the largest superarm is the superarm of everything. And then you would basically just end up in a random algorithm, which is just not like any better. But if you want to think about it in the context of like we have 4 gameplay types, and we can at the simplest base, we can say we have a superarm that's of one of those 4 gameplay types, right? And so we're just going to assume that the player, you know, for simplistically say, we'll just argue that the player only likes one of those gameplay types, right? So those are all the same size, but the player will have a clear preference for one of those 4 superarms that are dedicated to a particular gameplay type. Does that make sense?
No, because superarms with different sizes are in the same pool when you are choosing.
Yes.
Okay, then if my model always chooses the largest superarm that includes everything, then my click rate is 100% and the reward is the largest.
So the superarm of everything doesn't really get rewarded based on how we've chosen how to do rewards, right? So the superarm of everything, when we build a reward, like a superarm of, let's say, 1 crafting, right? We're ignoring all the quest proposals that don't have any crafting in it. So this size of this particular superarm, when the player actively starts saying, yes, I'm gonna like accept things, it's not possible for it to reward the superarm of everything. Because I'm only saying like, hey, I know that the player likes this crafting quest, so I'm only interested in giving the player like a potential quest proposal that has a crafting quest. So because the other superarm has things in it that we know, or we're just assuming that the player doesn't want, we're never going to give reward to the big superarm. So it, practically speaking, it gets triggered like the first time you run the algorithm, and then it never is rewarded again. So then it's just kind of like there, basically. Does that make sense? Yes. I am going to keep talking because I'm running a little on time. I'm more than happy to talk more about that. So I'm going to talk about this human summer study that we ran with Fashion Games. So this is going to be friends and family of the development team, and then they can play the game anytime during a 52-hour window. So this does not mean that the players are playing for 52 hours, like doing nothing wrong, but they're going to be playing the game like at specific, like at their leisure, basically. We had 208 players go to the game, and we did 8 tests. So we have 75 players that are the AI director and 133 that are random. The reason why these numbers are not equal is because there was some experimental technology that was being used in the development of Nightingale. And it accidentally caused some hiccups with my AV test, and some players got lost. So we scrubbed all that data out, obviously, and these are the numbers that we got left. So we collected some quantitative data, which is going to be in-game telemetry. So we collected the total playtime and then the acceptance rate of the quest score. So it's just going to be the number of quests that the players accepted versus the number that were actually shown to the player. So we also did a qualitative survey with Likert questions. So we had questions asking about if there's a satisfying variety for players, if players felt like they were actually completing the quests that they were given, and if they actually found quests they wanted to do, basically. So then we can ask the question, is this AI director more satisfying than a random algorithm? So there's kind of 3 answers to this. The AI director was more satisfying, random algorithm more satisfying, and players just couldn't tell a difference, which is completely fair. And honestly, given the results of this particular experiment, like I can't tell you which one this is. Like I have inconclusive results for this particular experiment due to a variety of factors between both like the company and like where the game is at, stuff like that. So I'm going to talk to some of these factors right now. So first, we can make an argument that the AI director is more satisfying experience. This is looking at the acceptance rate, and so the average acceptance of the AI director is 12%, which is compared to 9%. I realize these are both really, really low numbers, and the reason why these numbers are so low is because you also had to interact with the quest board to submit it. So there was a frequent amount of time where players were asking the AI director or the algorithm for quests, but they didn't actually want any, they just wanted to get XP. So it caused all these numbers to go really, really low. But because we can say, the acceptance rate is a little bit higher, we can like make the, we can say that the AI director is showing quests that the player actually prefers to do. Now we can look at evidence for the random algorithm actually better, and this is going to be the total like. So look at the median and average here at random. People that had random like this a lot better. Like they just played the game better. And if you think of like an AI director as a tool to help people play your game, this is not a good number. Like ideally, like in the perfect world, this AI director would actually make the game more fun and people play it longer. But this is just like what happened. And so I have some possible explanations for it. So the first one is intermittent reward schedule. Basically, the way that the random works is you're only going to get a quest that you want sometimes. And so then if you're just like constantly like rolling through things you don't really like it, but when you do get it, you're like, yes, this is great. That's why people are addicted to gambling. So it's kind of just like simulating like a little bit of a gambling effect there. The other thing that was probably even more of a effect though, is this mismatch between playtest game and the game that was actually expected to be played. So one of the assumptions we made is that this AI director would go in the game that was finished. Just practically speaking, some parts of the game were more dominant than others, like it's in development. And so maybe the kill loop was not as fun and was not as developed out yet because it was actually being made. So this idea of like the AI director couldn't really tell you like what parts of the game would be more preferred for players because there's just parts of the game that just weren't quite there yet anyways. So now I can talk about players receiving similar play experience, and this comes from our qualitative data, which we have only a fraction of because we were not able to tie to what part of the AV test they're on due to back-end hiccups. So I will also note this playtest of Random Inflection was the company's very first live playtest. So there were a lot of like, hey, we're doing these things for the first time. And so we had like hiccups and mistakes. Obviously, this has affected my experience. Or my experiment here, it affected a lot of things. It wasn't just like me. Basically, though, we had like Likert questions here, and you can see it like players are just saying it's all the same. You take this with a grain of salt, though, because this is a very, very small fraction of the actual players that went through. But if we're just looking at all these like evidences, we can just say like, maybe there wasn't enough of a difference in this AI director in this particular experience. So I just want to talk really quickly about being an academic, like working in industry. So like I worked in inflection games for 3 years, like as a real life developer. And there's some things that should be said about people who are also interested in doing these like kinds of collaboration. So the first, you need to find the right industry partner. Talk about like putting research in an actively developing game, and then actually evaluating research on like an industry timeline, because it's not you anymore. There's an entire company. So Inflection Games was the right partner for me because they were very invested in trying to actually like use some of like the great AI research that comes out of the university, right? Like they have strong university ties. They like Nathan has been working with them for a really long time. And so they were like, we want to try something experimental, new and weird. They were actually the ones that came up with the idea for this AI director, and they just said, there must be something cool that could do this thing. Can you help us? So there's also researching an active developing game. Again, this game is not released. To put this AI director in Nightingale, it took over a year of development time. Not just me, it took like senior engineers, other designers, like all this stuff. So this isn't like a simple, like you can code it out in a weekend. Like this is a process. And it's not just a process for you, it's a process for multiple people. There's also the issue of like timelines. So most people, they want to graduate fair, and they want to do it in a reasonable amount of time. Also fair. This experiment that we're trying to run was originally supposed to run in 2020, and it didn't run until 2021. I'm a PhD student, so more or less it has not affected like me and my research, but just as like a thought for master's students, like maybe something like this is not the right path if you want to graduate in less than 4 years. But yes, this is kind of my talk here. Yeah. Any questions? I guess.
So about your results and some of the players preparing random strike. I'm just hypothesizing, but like when you have players playing a game like this or an A/B test, is there an expectation that they're playing the same way that they would play if they actually had the game in their house, the game was released? Because the thing that I'm wondering is more like maybe they're just thrilled with the possibility of playing a game that we couldn't, and they just want to explore. So they want to try a bunch of different stuff. And then if you have any idea, it's like, oh, go back and queue again. Like, I want to do something else because I already could and I want to see this game. Like, is there a notion of like how representative this test is from the actual deployment? Like this was deployed and you had the thing is actually correct.
So that is completely fair, completely true. That is one of the perils of trying to do development and actually trying to do research and actually develop a game, which is why one of the assumptions I made, I was like, well, the game will be finished at some point, and I can't tailor this AI director for like every single development stage, right? Like it's too much effort. Unfortunately, I will never know how far away because they pivoted very hard. So a lot of the stuff from this version, like in this like deployment, like will just never be finished, basically. So if you had a game that was actually, they were gonna finish it, like that might be something interesting to like talk about. That's one of those questions I will not be able to answer with this research. Yeah.
What was the reason for the game to pivot from MMO to survival?
Aaron Flynn, the CEO of Inflection, has a great answer to that in some PR stuff. You should probably just go like read what he has to say about it. Like I don't work for Inflection, so yeah.
Well, I like your test definition because that was interesting. As like a research problem for you to solve or like communicate. I think if there's anything else you like we're thinking about including in it, or if that was, yeah, I guess that's my question.
Oh no, yeah. So that's she just got like some of myself with the quest definition. So one of the things I kind of glossed over in my quest definition is the structure of a quest. For me, that is the last piece of my like research that I'm like not quite happy with. Originally, I proposed that the structure of a quest should be a partially ordered set, and that came out of looking at a bunch of academic definitions, and that was the most general thing I could find. Practically speaking, though, you can find examples of quests and games that cannot be partially ordered. So that kind of indicating like maybe this isn't the correct model. So for me, that's the last piece that I've been like working on that I don't have published yet. I don't ready yet. But like, that's the like thing that I want to really just like finish out to say, like, this is like a usable class definition, like for academics, like if we could do that, like, you know, sort of.
Well, the modeling of it is really interesting. I'll read some of it.
Oh, thank you.
I do have to say this is very, very interesting to see what would happen if you run this on something that's already live and how that affects like the players and the game over time. Would that lead to players like over time being like segregated into accepting only what they like originally, because this has no like states and it cannot like effectively like say, hey, this player's behavior is changed, like his preference is changing over time. And that might lead to some kind of separation in the players, which is maybe good, maybe not good for these big online games. And the other thing is that so you can do this with another objective, and that would be instead of maximizing the player engagement, which is not very easily like underlying reason for that is not actually what players think they like, it's what they do based on the game. Okay. Instead, it might be interesting to see what would happen if you want to maximize the engagement of player with new things. You sometimes show the parts of the game that they don't usually play in a novel way, and they will test it out and like that part of the game. And now they are like interested in that type of activity.
No, I think those are very fair points. A lot of this hinges on having a game. And with the pivot from inflection, like one of the decisions they made, which is fine, like they chose to cut this research project. So it's like, those would be great, cool things to find out. And, you know, it'd be great if somebody else wants to go track down a live server studio and pitch them on this. But like, for me, practically in my PhD, like I'm just not going to be able to look into those kinds of things in a real like game environment. Like this is basically the closest I was able to get to it. So, yeah.
So I know you're not done your research, but do you have anything that you want to do in the future broadly, things you want to explore?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been working on over the past year is building a test bed for this AI director, because it's not Nightingale anymore, and these things should like, you know, you need to test it. And because I had inconclusive results, I need to repeat this experiment like human sub-study to try to get something that is more like conclusive. Like I can't tell you whether this is a good idea or not. So I've been spending like a year just straight up doing game development with the hopes of it being able to use as a test bed for other academics who might be interested in this kind of area, so that they don't have to spend a year like developing a game top to bottom, and then they can just, you know, get the Git repo and then they just program the AI director, and then their ones are easier. So that's the thing that I've been working on. It's not quite done yet, but I'm hoping to be able to run a human subject study on it this fall. So